Crimea was supposed to be Vladimir Putin's untouchable superfortress, protected by tens of billions of dollars, 60,000 Russian troops, layered S-400 defenses, thousands of mines, and the entire Black Sea fleet. Now, that fortress is slowly turning into a trap. Ukraine isn't storming Crimea with tanks, it's strangling it from the inside. In one operation alone, 151 drones shut down the 19-kilometer Kerch Bridge for 11 hours, while Russian convoys across the 600-kilometer M14 highway now move under constant fear of FPV drone attacks. Fuel is running low. Logistics are collapsing. Air defenses worth hundreds of millions are being destroyed by drones, costing barely $250,000. This is no longer a siege of walls, it's the slow suffocation of an empire. For Moscow, Crimea was never just territory. It was the crown jewel of Russian revival, a sacred symbol of imperial glory, political legitimacy, and national pride. In Putin's eyes, controlling Crimea meant Russia was back as a great power dominating the Black Sea. Losing it was unthinkable. For over 10 years, he poured tens of billions of dollars into transforming the peninsula into a modern fortress. Deep underground bunkers in Sevastopol, layered S-400 air defense systems, naval fortifications, thousands of mines, and the formidable Black Sea fleet. Every hill, every approach, every kilometer was engineered to repel a full-scale invasion. Putin was certain the threat would come from the front, a massive amphibious assault, waves of troops storming the beaches, tanks thundering across the narrow isthmus. He prepared for armies approaching the walls. Ukraine began attacking the arteries behind the walls instead. Russia built this fortress to survive everything. And once Ukraine stopped looking at Crimea as a fortress, it started looking at Crimea as a system. Ukraine understood one brutal truth: a direct assault on Crimea would be a bloodbath. The peninsula was laced with dense minefields, backed by overwhelming artillery, protected by layered naval defenses, and shielded by advanced air defense systems. A traditional invasion would mean thousands of Ukrainian lives lost for minimal gains. Instead of charging the walls, Ukraine chose a far more sophisticated path: strategic isolation. Through relentless logistics warfare, drone pressure, precision infrastructure attacks, command disruption, and systematic attrition of Russian air defenses, Ukraine is slowly strangling the peninsula. This is not a siege designed to storm walls. It is a siege designed to exhaust systems. Ukraine does not need a quick, dramatic victory. It only needs to make Crimea unsustainable, too expensive, too difficult, and too isolated to hold in the long run. Like a surgeon with a scalpel rather than a berserker with an axe, Ukraine is striking at the soft underbelly: roads, radar stations, bridges, command centers, and supply flows, not the heavily fortified walls themselves. And every fortress survives through arteries. Crimea has 5 major ones. The Kerch Bridge was never just infrastructure. It was Putin's ultimate declaration of permanence, a gleaming 19-kilometer symbol of Russian triumph, political legitimacy, and the unbreakable union between Crimea and the mainland. When it opened in 2018, it was meant to prove once and for all that Crimea would never again be separated from Russia. It stood as a monument to imperial confidence, but Ukraine has turned that symbol into a permanent vulnerability. In one major operation, Ukraine unleashed 151 drones, paralyzing the bridge for 11 hours. Trains ground to a halt. Truck convoys were delayed for days. What was designed as an unbreakable lifeline became a choke point. The bridge's fatal weakness is simple. Russia cannot fully protect its entire length. It remains exposed to swarms of aerial drones, naval drone boats, underwater sabotage, and special operations teams. No amount of air defense can cover every meter, every support pillar, every vulnerable joint. Even more damaging are the weight restrictions now imposed. The bridge can no longer safely carry the heaviest military loads. Heavy logistics, the lifeblood of any sustained occupation, have been severely crippled. A fortress that depends on a single bridge becomes inherently fragile. The Kerch Bridge no longer operates like a symbol of confidence. It operates like a hostage Russia must constantly defend. But Kerch is only one artery. The second stretches across occupied southern Ukraine. What makes this campaign so dangerous is that Ukraine is not trying to destroy Crimea in one dramatic offensive. It is slowly transforming Russia's greatest Black Sea fortress into a resource-consuming liability, a massive strategic burden that drains money, equipment, and attention with no end in sight. So ask yourself, are modern wars still decided by who captures territory or by who can keep logistics alive the longest? This is the quiet revolution in military thinking playing out right now. To understand why, look at the road Russia once trusted most. Stretching nearly 600 kilometers from Taganrog through Mariupol, Melitopol, and finally into Jankoy in northern Crimea, Highway M14 was once the undisputed logistics backbone of the Russian occupation. This single artery carried the vast majority of fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and reinforcements needed to keep the peninsula alive. Now it has become a highway of constant fear. The entire route lies within easy range of Ukrainian drones. Using swarms of low-cost FPV drones, reconnaissance assets, and persistent surveillance, Ukraine is conducting what military analysts call battlefield air interdiction without possessing actual air superiority. Cheap drones are doing the work that expensive NATO fighter jets traditionally performed, disrupting convoys, denying free movement, creating paralyzing fear, and putting relentless pressure on every kilometer of road. Russian logistics officers and drivers now calculate survival probabilities before every trip. Convoys move slower. Fuel consumption rises. Night movements have increased. Repair crews are overwhelmed. The psychological toll is immense. The road itself is becoming psychologically radioactive. But starving the fortress is only half the strategy. Ukraine is also attacking the brain coordinating the fortress. While the arteries bleed, Ukraine has turned its attention to the brain of the fortress. Ukrainian precision strikes have repeatedly hit critical command and intelligence nodes across Crimea and the southern corridor. FSB headquarters, command posts on the Arabat Spit, and key centers in Armyansk have all been penetrated. In some operations, elite SBU Alpha units and long-range drones have delivered strikes with surgical accuracy drones slipping through windows and exploding inside buildings, humiliating Russia's supposedly secure rear areas. This is not random violence. It is a deliberate attack on Russia's greatest vulnerability, its rigid, top-down command culture. The Russian military system is built on centralized decision-making. Lower-level officers are trained to wait for orders from above rather than act on initiative. When command nodes are destroyed or forced to relocate, everything slows down. Logistics convoys lose rerouting authority. Units hesitate. Coordination collapses. Confusion spreads through the ranks. Ukraine is not only attacking Russian infrastructure, it is attacking the centralized culture that keeps Russian infrastructure functioning. By disrupting the brain, Ukraine is turning a powerful military machine into something rigid, slow, and dangerously fragile. And while the brain slows down, the shield protecting Crimea is beginning to tear apart. Russia once believed Crimea's air defense was impenetrable. The peninsula was protected by one of the densest and most advanced systems in the world: S-400 Triumph batteries, Pantsir missile complexes, TOR systems, and multiple overlapping layers designed to destroy any threat from the sky. They were wrong. Ukraine has weaponized cost asymmetry with devastating efficiency. A single Ukrainian drone strike package can cost around $250,000, while the Russian systems it destroys radars, launchers, and missiles are worth tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. This is not attrition. It is economic warfare in the sky. Every time a radar is destroyed, a blind corridor opens in the shield. That corridor allows more drones to penetrate deeper. Those drones destroy more radars and command nodes. New blind zones appear. The collapse begins to feed on itself. This is how fortress systems die in modern warfare, not through one catastrophic explosion, but through cascading blindness. With each successful strike, pressure on the remaining systems grows. Operators are exhausted. Coverage becomes stretched thin. The fear of the next wave is constant. The shield protecting Crimea is no longer shrinking evenly. It is beginning to tear open in layers. And once the shield weakens, the land gateways become even more dangerous. At the northern entrance to Crimea lies Armyansk, the peninsula's primary land gateway and its most critical supply bottleneck. All heavy logistics flowing from occupied southern Ukraine into the fortress must pass through this narrow choke point. Ukraine understands it does not need to capture Armyansk. It only needs to maintain sustained fire control over it. Using long-range precision strikes, drones, and artillery, Ukrainian forces can turn every convoy entering or leaving the area into a high-risk operation. Supplies are delayed, routes become lethal, and Russian logistics officers face constant vulnerability. When this pressure on Armyansk is combined with the instability of the Kerch Bridge, the entire supply map for Crimea narrows dangerously. Two major arteries are now under permanent threat. A fortress becomes a trap the moment every road into it also becomes a road under surveillance. Slowly but relentlessly, Crimea is closing inward on itself, its once proud defenses now feeling increasingly claustrophobic. And inside that shrinking fortress are tens of thousands of Russian troops still consuming supplies every day. Inside the shrinking fortress live approximately 60,000 Russian troops. Every single day, this force consumes thousands of tons of supplies, food rations, diesel fuel, artillery shells, spare parts, medicine, and maintenance equipment. What was once a powerful military asset is rapidly becoming a massive logistical burden. When the arteries are under constant pressure, even basic sustainment turns into a daily struggle. Fuel shortages limit vehicle movement, ammunition stocks dwindle, repair parts fail to arrive. The fortress that was built to project power is slowly turning into a prison. A soldier without fuel and ammunition is not defending a fortress. He is trapped inside one. As supplies tighten, morale begins to erode. Readiness drops. Units lose flexibility. Confidence in command fades. What starts as a logistics problem gradually becomes a human one. Soldiers who feel abandoned, isolated, and vulnerable. Crimea is not just being isolated militarily. It is slowly suffocating, and the suffocation spreads beyond the military. Civilian life is beginning to feel it too. The suffocation has now reached Crimea's civilian population. Once proudly marketed by Moscow as a Russian paradise, a sun-soaked resort of opportunity and reclaimed glory, the peninsula has become a militarized zone of shortages and uncertainty. Fresh water remains scarce. The economy is stagnating under the weight of isolation. Property values are collapsing as buyers disappear. Thousands of residents, especially those with means, have quietly left in search of stability. Businesses struggle with broken supply chains, while fear has replaced the early optimism that followed the 2014 annexation. What was supposed to be a showcase of Russian strength now feels like a besieged outpost. Daily life is defined by blackouts, empty shelves, and the constant shadow of incoming drones. The more Crimea became a fortress, the less it could remain a normal society. War is consuming civilian reality. What began as a military project is hollowing out the entire region, turning homes into outposts and dreams into liabilities. But the deepest danger for Moscow is that Crimea no longer drains only itself. To keep Crimea alive, Russia is forced to constantly divert critical resources from elsewhere. Air defense systems are stripped from other regions and rushed south. Logistics units are redirected to repair damaged bridges and roads. Troops are rotated into the peninsula, ships are tied down defending the Black Sea coast, and specialized engineering teams are tied up protecting the Kerch Bridge. Every battery, every truck, every ship sent to Crimea is one less available on the Donetsk front, around Moscow, or along other vulnerable sectors. What was meant to be a forward power projection base has become a black hole, constantly pulling in more than it gives back. The strategic math is turning against Moscow. Crimea now consumes vast amounts of money, equipment, and attention, while offering diminishing military value in return. Crimea is no longer only a military asset. It is becoming a strategic debt Russia keeps paying interest on. The more Russia pours in to save its fortress, the weaker it becomes everywhere else. The empire is being forced to defend its crown jewel at the expense of the rest of its territory. And this is the moment history repeatedly warns empires about. Fortresses are supposed to protect empires, but history often shows the opposite. When a fortress becomes too expensive to sustain, it slowly begins consuming the empire that built it. And if you're still watching this story, Crimea probably no longer feels like just another battlefield. It feels like a warning. So tell me, is Crimea still Russia's greatest strategic prize, or has it become Putin's most dangerous trap? Because the answer may shape the next phase of this war. In the 21st century, modern war no longer focuses only on soldiers and trenches. It attacks systems, networks, psychology, energy flows, communication lines, and infrastructure. The truly decisive battles often happen invisibly. Collapse no longer requires massive explosions or dramatic charges. It arrives quietly through shortages, uncertainty, slowing logistics, exhausted command chains, and creeping fear. A radar goes dark. A convoy hesitates. A city feels the weight of isolation. The system begins to die from within. In the 21st century, collapse no longer begins at the front line. It begins inside the invisible systems keeping armies and societies alive. And that may become Crimea's true place in military history, not as a fortress conquered by force, but as the first major symbol of a new kind of strategic defeat. History's greatest fortresses rarely die from broken walls. They die from within, when the systems that feed and sustain them are cut. Ukraine has applied this ancient lesson with modern precision. Instead of a suicidal frontal assault, it has systematically attacked the arteries, the Kerch Bridge, the bleeding spine of Highway M14, command nodes, air defense radars, critical choke points, and the entire logistics network. Russia, in response, is forced to spend more, move more systems, stretch its resources thinner, and defend more vulnerable points, all while extracting less and less strategic value from the peninsula. Crimea is becoming harder and harder to sustain. This is not a siege of walls. It is a siege of systems. What began as Putin's proudest symbol of Russian resurgence is slowly transforming into a symbol of Russian overextension, a fortress that demands endless resources while delivering diminishing returns. If you want more deep battlefield documentaries that go beyond headlines and uncover the real systems, psychology, and strategic transformations shaping this war, stay with the channel. Because Crimea may become one of the defining lessons of 21st century warfare, you do not always need to destroy a fortress to defeat it. Sometimes, you only need to cut the arteries keeping it alive.